Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Lisa Ansell.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Ansell, and I'm the Associate Director of the USC Kasdan Institute. USC Kasdan Director Steve Ross sends his regrets for not being able to attend tonight as he continues to recover from surgery. On behalf of the USC Kasdan Institute, the USC Shoah Foundation, and Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 42nd Annual Jerome Nemer Lecture as we engage together on the topic of fusion, mosaic, braid, decoding and deciphering Black Jewish history, identity, and material culture. As we explore tonight's topic, let us take a moment of silence as we simultaneously pray for the return of the hostages now in captivity for over a year, the victims of the October 7th massacre, and for peace for all innocent people trapped in a cycle of violence and chaos in the region. This year, we are honored to welcome our keynote speaker, Michael Twitty. Michael is an African-American Jewish writer, award-winning culinary historian, educator, and author. Moreover, his book, The Cooking Gene, won the 2018 James Beard Foundation Book of the Year Award, and Kosher Soul won the 2023 Jewish Book of the Year Award. We are likewise very honored to welcome featured respondent Dr. Ben Ratzkoff. Ben is an associate professor in the Department of Critical Theory and Social Justice at Occidental College and former visiting assistant professor at Hebrew Union College. His work sits at the intersection of multiple fields, including history, Black studies, Jewish studies, and comparative ethnic and racial studies. He teaches on memory, memorialization, anti-Semitism, and the Holocaust, and has produced significant scholarship, including James Baldwin's Black Critique of Jewish Whiteness for Jewish Studies Quarterly. Our distinguished speakers will be introduced in greater detail by Sarah Benor, Professor of Contemporary Jewish Studies at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, Los Angeles, Director of the Jewish Language Project, and Chair of the Nemer Lecture Committee. But I would like to offer Michael Twitty and Ben Ratzkoff a warm welcome and our gratitude for sharing their insights with us tonight as we reflect on the intersection of culinary arts, identity, and Black Jewish history. We are greatly looking forward to hearing from both of our esteemed speakers today. The USC Kasdan Institute takes great pride in our 3 annual endowed lectures, which, like today's Nemer Lecture, cover a range of topics from Jewish political life to Jewish scholarly and artistic contributions across America. Our 2 latest series, Kasdan Conversations and USC Goes to Temple, aim to bring together students, faculty, and the community at large for more informal and engaging discussions that explore a wide variety of contemporary topics that are at the forefront of American Jewish culture and identity. Likewise, USC Goes to Temple is an innovative partnership between the USC Kasdan Institute and Southern California-based synagogues, where university lectures and research are brought directly to the temples to serve the unique interests of each diverse community. To date, we are proud to have partnered with over 18 synagogues across Southern California in bringing Kasdan programming to diverse Jewish religious and scholarly communities. If you haven't already done so, I invite you to join our mailing list on the Kasdan Institute website to be updated on all of the exciting events and partnerships that the USC Kasdan Institute is pleased to offer this year. I would especially like to highlight the series we have created in partnership with UCLA, the UCLA Nazarian Center for Israel Studies, and the UCLA Department of History and Tel Aviv University, called The Next Generation: Changing Attitudes Towards Israel Among Younger Americans, with the goal of advancing the meaningful dialogue around the Israel-Palestine question in a constructive and forward-thinking way. At this time, I would like to invite my colleague Sarah Ben-Or to the podium to introduce our distinguished speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you all for coming today. It's great to see a nice crowd. I'm going to start with some quotes from Kosher Soul, which is an amazing book. If you haven't already read it, I highly recommend it. This book is the border-crossing story of how the ups and downs of daily existence as a Jew of color affect us from Kop to Kishkes as we sit down to partake in the soul-warming solace of our meals. And I was culturally non-binary, bringing America with its melting potness to a salad bar with partitions. So these are quotes from the amazing Michael W. Twitty, who is an award-winning culinary historian and food writer living in Fredericksburg, Virginia. He blogs at afroculinaria.com. He has appeared on many shows, including Bizarre Foods America with Andrew Zimmern, Many Rivers to Cross with Henry Louis Gates, and most recently, Taste the Nation with top chefs Padma Lakshmi. His book, The Cooking Gene, published by HarperCollins in 2017, traces his ancestry through food from Africa to America and from slavery to freedom. The Cooking Gene won the 2018 James Beard Award, as you heard, and he was the first Black author to receive that award. His piece on visiting Ghana in Bon Appetit was included in Best Food Writing in 2019, and it was also nominated for a 2019 James Beard Award. His next book, Rice, a New York Times noted cookbook, became available through UNC Press in 2021. Kosher Soul, the follow-up to The Cooking Gene, was published in 2022 and received the 2023 National Jewish Book Award. Michael is a National Geographic Explorer, a TED Fellow, and a member of the 2022 Time 100 Next class, and the first revolutionary in residence at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. The respondent today, as you heard, will be Ben Ratzkoff, who is assistant professor in the Department of Critical Theory and Social Justice at Occidental College, and he was previously my colleague at HUC. And Ben received his doctorate in comparative literature from the University of California, Los Angeles in 2021. His research interrogates the historical and theoretical relationship among anti-Semitism, colonialism, and white supremacy, the potentials and pitfalls of comparative approaches to analyzing Blackness and Jewishness, and the politics of Holocaust memory and representation. And in addition to the publications that you heard about, he's also been an invited speaker in a number of international venues, including the Haus der Kulturen der Welt in Berlin and the Birkbeck Institute for the Study of Anti-Semitism in London. So today, Michael's talk will be Fusion, Mosaic, Braid, Decoding and Deciphering Black Jewish History, Identity, and Material Culture. Take it away, Michael.
You know, hearing your bio being read is like your eulogy every time. It's something. So I'll tell you a little story about James Beard. It's a very white organization. And ain't that many brothers in the crowd. Even though it's the Oscars of the food world, right? There's the restaurant side, then there's the media side. And I found out when I was in Ghana that I had been nominated, and I really put a lot of work my heart and soul into The Cooking Gene. The Cooking Gene was very much destiny, but I wasn't sure I was gonna win anything. And why is it important? It's important because you know what publishers do? They don't support folks of color who don't have sales, who don't have awards, and don't have name recognition. And so what they do, the next person behind you is say, nah, we tried that. Meanwhile, they have, how many shows do you know about African Americans versus Italian American cooking or Italian cooking? But when you try to put on another show, as some of my friends and audience can tell you, we already did that. If it's successful, we'll do more of that, but not more something different. So I was incredibly nervous, and it was sad. I rode the megabus. I would never get on there if you paid me now, from Washington, D.C. to New York, and I sat in the back. I mean, complete self-flagellation, and I'm just sad looking and sad. Then I, dressed for the awards and have my kente cloth I got in Ghana, and I have a kippah, and I have a dashiki, and I have the rebbe, and I have a this and a that. And I wouldn't eat, I wouldn't drink, nothing. So they called my category best writing. I just knew it was gonna be a disaster, terrible. I could run out the door. Then when they called my name and I went up there and I said, Shehekianu, half the room goes, Mishpuche. And the first person to actually shout me out was Andrew Zimmern, which was awesome. Then I sat down, I chilled out, and towards the end of the evening, Scott Alves Barton, who is also African-American, gets up, and I'm like, well, he's the only brother they got. So what's going on? And he says, Michelle Obama, oh, he talking about Michelle Obama, what's going on? Then he says she lives in a house built by the enslaved. I said, okay, it's some enslaved people, what's going on? Still in my head, it's all in slow motion. In his book, and then I lost it. Kente fell off. I ran up before they even finished the whole thing. And Book of the Year, man. I still treasure that. And I tell a group of young people, you know something? It took me 40 years to get to that moment. So don't think it's gonna come tomorrow or the next day. It might, but it also might be at 40 or 60 or 70 or 80. But if you want it, it'll happen. And that's the good news for this very ungood news time. So I want to first start by recognizing the indigenous people of the LA area, the Tongva, the Serrano, the Kiz, the Chumash, and as an avid child reader, the Nicoleño people, from whom the young woman the island of blue dolphins came. And then I want to give another kind of land acknowledgement, starting with the Afro-Mexicans, who represent half the people who were here at the founding of what became Los Angeles. And the Afro-Mexican politician, the governor, Pio Pico, from which Pico Robertson gets his name. Can't do nothing without us. In addition, I want to pay respect to the Black Latina woman, Maria Rita Quinteros Valdez Villa, the original owner of the land that became Beverly Hills. And give respect to Baldwin Hills, Crenshaw, Lamar Park. I gotta shout them out. Watts, Ladera Heights, West Adams, Windsor Hills, and many other spaces in which Black Americans, Black Angelinos have created community and made world history. That was my great aunt Helen, who lived with her husband and family for many years in Baldwin Hills. May she rest in peace and power. And I say that because I lived here for a couple of months. Actually, this is almost the 1-year anniversary when I showed up in LA for what became almost 6 months. And I learned a lot about the city and our heritage here. All right, now for the thrill you came for. My name is Michael W. Twitty. My Hebrew name is Akiba bin Avraham Vasara. I am a 47-year-old African-American man of Southern heritage from the DC area, a born and raised Washingtonian, son of Chocolate City, raised back and forth across the border of Washington, D.C. and Montgomery County, Maryland, in a metropolitan community with Jewish plurality most of my life. I grew up with rumors of Jewish ancestry, somewhat confirmed by hints of connections to Jewish Ukraine and North Africa through ancestry services, but far from set in stone or definitive. I became part of the Jewish community in 2002 in the month of Shavat in front of an Orthodox-based inn. I'm often asked, how did I become Jewish or why? But the most important question is why I remain, or what has sustained me over 22 years in my patience, commitment, and passion for Jewish observance, life, and peoplehood. So if you didn't get that, I've stopped answering the question, so how come you're here? And ask the question of other people, so why are you still here? You tell me yours and I'll tell you mine. The best way to get rid of a mouse from a shul is to give it a b'nai mitzvah. So I figure as someone who taught Hebrew school for 15 years, if anybody's in the Nobel Peace Prize committee, I deserve a nomination. I taught 7th grade. So you already know. I have jokingly defined myself as a progressive, blue-blooded, Afro-Ashkenazi Dixie queer, an amalgam of Jewish selves with other pieces, gay, farmer, teacher, cook, sometimes chef, scholar. I conceive my concept of who I am at the self-defining ground, and that's an August Wilson quote, of where the middle passage meets the shtetl and milah. The milah is the Sephardi Mizrahi version of the ghetto or the shtetl, by the way. And at the crossroads of Yerushalayim and Stonewall. And I have to feed everyone, background, preferences, allyship, allergies, and all, which is typical for Jewish cooking. But this is not about me. This is about us. Chocolade Segula, the chocolate chosen. Why did I write Kosher Soul? I'm going to make that very brief. You should know that initially when I started to get out into the world and be vulnerable, the first thing you ever heard from everybody was not, oh, great, a new voice. It was too niche, too small, no one cares. And so I set out to prove that someone cared, not for my sake, but for people who came after me. There's somebody out there who has a very valid, beautiful, important story, but they're not going to get heard unless I kick the door in or knock the legs off the damn table. So that's my first job. So in doing that, I wanted Kosher Soul to talk about the culture and issues we face as Jews who are black. I'm going to not use the phrase Jews of color in this conversation, because I don't want to dilute this issue. I'm speaking of Jews of African descent, people who identify as black. So there are maybe 150 to 200,000 to 400,000 of us. And that may or may not include all of those children who were born and their descendants during the various times in which blacks and Jews as separate aggregates have had children together. Not just people who are born and raised Jewish or become Jewish, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, this culture has yet to count those people as part of the whole, even though they are probably the largest group of European American and Black American mixers outside of course, the American South and that whole situation. And if you don't know what I mean plantations, and you know what I mean, and it's unfortunate and it's awful, but it's a part of our history. So there are people in this audience, friends of mine, who are at the forefront of those identity conversations. But there are lots of people who are black who walk around you every single day, and you would never know. Mama was an Ashkenazi Jewish woman who was an activist, or daddy was a Jew of color. And they walk around that way because the society at the time made no room for those children, and yet has the nerve to cry 30 years later, we don't have enough Jewish kids. Well, when we're black and brown, you didn't want us. So we can talk about that later. I'm not gonna get distracted on a tangent. That is the black sermonic tradition to do so. So I'm just gonna read briefly from Kosher Soul, then I'm gonna get into this because Sarah is a prompt person. And I am on CP time and Jewish time, so y'all could be here all night, and you don't have pajamas, so let's just get this done. All right, look. I'm gonna kind of buzz through this part where I talk about who's black and Jewish. That's a really critical question. And it could be Yaphet Kotto. It could be Nell Carter. It could be Eric Green or Enoch Katz. It could be Nate Looney. It could be me. It could be our dear friend Anthony, who sings in Yiddish, but proudly says the words, "I am a Jew by choice." It could be someone like me, who had to do certain halakhic things, but actually comes from a mixed bloodline. It could be someone who, absolutely no question, like my blood cousin, Shes Rishon, Rabbi Shes Rishon, Manishana, who was raised Black and Orthodox by generations of Black and Orthodox observant people. So we do exist. Or it could be somebody of African, Panamanian, Surinamese, Ghanaian, Nigerian, Ethiopian, or South African background, for whom these things have been a part of the culture and the family for generations. And sometimes when people are open to hearing this information, they want a narrative that is comparable or on par with, say, for example, talking about the Jews of Morocco, which, if you know anything, that's not one singular story, but something quaint and cute, 240 characters, if you will. Something that can be said over 2 bites of a bagel at Kiddush. Well, that's not how this works. Think of us as a mosaic. And we're going to be that for quite some time. In fact, my cousin gives us this reference to, because he grew up Hasidic, not just Black or Orthodox, but Hasidic. But as a reference, one of the Rebbes said his mother was distraught because their yichus was on paper and it burned in a fire. And she said, how will anybody ever know how prosperous and how learned we are? And he says, well, don't worry about what burned up in the fire. Our mitzvahs will speak for us. It'll be even better than the yichus that burned. And I have the same attitude towards us as Black Jews. Y'all don't even know where we come from. Just know that we're here. We're patient enough to be here and stick with things. We're giving our talents, our thoughts, our spirit to this existence, this Jewish life in America. And if we could move forward with us, that'd be great. As opposed to when you go to the Kotel and someone says, oh, did you have an Orthodox conversion? I'm good at seeing Jewish souls. When you go into a shul and you say, Shabbat Shalom, and someone says, thanks, right? Listen, lady, I taught you all 4 of your grandkids. I was one who put them on that bima. Get real. Or just before you even know my name, are you Jewish? Or are you a friend of the bat mitzvah? No, actually go to this shul and blah, blah, blah. What's your name? Hi, Shabbat Shalom. My name's Michael. And before you ask me about my journey, tell me about yours, because we're on equal footing here. And understand that we may be different levels of observance and organizational commitments, and we may even be, excuse the word, patrilineal. But we are all Jews. I guess I just summed that up without actually reading the book. That's cool. But the point is, you get it, is to just tell people and make sure they understand that, we're tired of showing our papers. And we're not consulted, we're not asked our opinion. It's not for us, this is not just, and you'll see in the rest of the talk, it's not just a matter of religion. This is not our church. This is our peoplehood first and foremost. And I think we all should understand, Mordecai Kaplan was onto something when he made the connotation that Judaism is the religious civilization of our people, but our peoplehood comes first. And if you understand us on that level, then we fit in just fine in all these discourses about Jewish identity around the world and in America. Okay, I did that without having to read a whole bunch of words. That's great. So when people talk about Black Jews, Jews who are Black, Jews of African descent, or as I like to say, BIJs, Blacks involved in Judaism. Because it could be someone who's not recognized as halakhically Jewish, but maybe living a very Jewish life. I would point you to the synagogues in Westchester County, in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, in Baltimore, and Philadelphia, where now it's different. I think a lot of those folks have had some type of halakhic whatever, but for generations they felt no need to. And everyone everybody was kosher. There was a mechitza. There, people read from the Torah. The Torah was Ashkenazi, soft in the, and its setting. It wasn't antique, but they read the Torah in Mizrahi notation. I forget the word right now. Trope. Thank you. And that was their life. And then there are other people who were always in the margins of Jewish life in America, but they were there. So we'll get into that in 1 second. Our intersectional, of course, that would be me. Intersectional nature is often mocked and poked fun of rather than honored. And we can mourn the implications of being marginalized. We can dive into why amplification is necessary and what is precious and important about who we are. The values and vision that are being merged as Jews of African descent, that we are unmistakable yet coded. Our layers are only obvious to the initiated, but there are so many initiated or understand why initiation is necessary. We are 200,000 to 400,000 strong. We are a 500-year-old tribe with 70,000-year-old roots, practicing a 3,500-year-old religion in over 250-year-old multicultural democratic experiment. So just so you know, we're about depending on who you talk to, 400 to 500 years old as African Americans. Do you start at 1619 or 1526? Either way, we've been here quite a minute. And so have our cousins in the diaspora. Next point, our genes are 70,000 years old as Homo sapiens who have been in West Africa. That's pretty much longer than any other group of Homo sapiens on Earth. And those genes and those ideas and that survival and that community is in us. And then, of course, 3,500, 4,000 years of Judaism and Jewish life. And 250 years, may it be more than 250, if you know what I mean, of democracy in America. Our ancestors include Solomon Franco, their words, not mine, the mulatto Jews, they spelled that J-U-E, whom we know, not surprisingly, America, from a record of his arrest, the first black Jew in record in English America, the record of his existence, I knew you were gonna laugh, record of his existence was profiling and an arrest record. How could you possibly be? How could you possibly exist? But not just that, but you are profaning the Christian Sabbath by walking on it. Think about that. That's how deep this is. And it goes on to be a few more things that are uncomfortable. The black women who were buried in the cemetery of Shearith Israel in New York. Uncle, and if you're a Southern, you know what a double-edged sword the word uncle is. William Simons in Charleston. Affectionately known as Uncle Billy, but a faithful Jew who they received special permission to bury his remains in Charleston. And by the way, there are black Jews buried in Amsterdam and in Rome and in Venice that you've never heard of. But not one or two. No, not a handful. Enough to make it a community issue on where those people belonged, where they could be buried, and if they were to be included in the same prayer group. There's a lot of history that we have yet to recognize. Well, also, there was a young man in the 19th century in the Northeast who arrived from Africa, and they were very skeptical about his Jewish identity. And the rabbi quizzed him, and guess what? Mishpacha. But these are people you never hear about. They're not in our kids' textbooks on American history and Judaism in any Hebrew school. So they think we just came out of nowhere. When the reality is, Jewish history doesn't begin with the words in the Purim spiel from Lithuania to Galicia. What does it say? V'hodu v'kush. Not one country in Europe is mentioned. It doesn't say Ashkenaz, Sfarad. And all of those customs and all that history in the Torah come out of the nexus of the meeting of Africa and Asia. I'm not a stranger. I'm not a guest. I've been here. All of us have been here, and we have a story to tell. Let's start with names. What do diasporic people who are marginalized have to contend with? What do we call ourselves? How do we name ourselves? Our first prophet, our first teacher, our first rabbi, if you will, before rabbinics, Moshe. Where does his name come from? Is it Masha, drawn out of the water? Or is it because we've lost the original part of his name, which is probably the Egyptian deity he was named after? You know, the Pharaoh, Tutmoshe, right? The son of Thoth. And that's what happens the minute you're born out of your homeland. What does Jacob say to his grandchildren? Who are these? Why do you look different? Why do you sound different? Who are you? That question that we've forgotten about what happens when a family spreads out and they start to inevitably change. And what do you call yourself? You know, in Eastern Europe, people were named Dov, it still are in Brooklyn, Dov, Bear, Tzvi, Hirsch. You hear it? One is Yiddish, one is Hebrew. It's an accommodation. And it's kind of like when my ancestors came to America, to the South in particular. My fifth great grandfather, his name was probably Kwaku, because his grandchildren's name was Jack, and it was passed down. But see, in Jamaica, in Virginia, other places, in Guyana, Kwaku, which means Wednesday born, turns into Kwako, turns into Quack, turns into Jack, because it becomes anglicized. And in telling you that we're not antipodal people, we're people who live on the same, different sides of the same coin, and to make the same adjustments. And that's why blacks and Jews understand each other. Centuries later, we know about how Jewish names in America were forced to change to make Jewish lives less Jewy. Who was Hal Lipschitz? Anyone remember? They changed his name. All those names of the people who lived in that generation of actors changed their names from Eastern European sounding Ashkenazi to Anglo, you know? That was a whole process. And it went with changing your hair, to changing your nose, to cutting off your beard, to become acceptable. And what other people did that more than black folk, than Jews? Black folks. And of course, Native Americans were forced to. But we have to think about this. There was a time when names and faces and appearances and how you, remember the phrase, are you willing to be an American on the street and a Jew in your house? What are the costs of being American? And what do marginalized people pay to become American? And this Venn diagram, us, them, together, is part of that whole how we construct our lives. How do we dress? How do we name ourselves? For a lot of black Jews, having a Hebrew name is more than just a Hebrew name. It's a restoration. It's kind of like what our black Muslim sisters and brothers go through. Having that Muslim name, having that is a restoration, because what happened to the names that we had when we came from Africa to America? They were removed, they were stolen, they were purposely attacked. So for a lot of black Jews, when we get that interference about our identity, it's grating, because we take such pride in our names. My name, Akiba, notice I use the more Sephardi Mizrahi version, is the name of someone who had not one drop of blood from Abraham and Sarah in his veins, but became one of our greatest rabbis. purposeful. You know the story of Malik El-Haj Shabazz, otherwise known as Malcolm X, and the importance he placed on regaining his name from Malcolm Little. That's what we go through. It's for other people, it's a Hebrew name that you use, ceremonial, great. For us, it's about making sure people understand we have an identity and it can't be taken from us. And we embrace in our philosophy of who we are duality. So for example, rabbinics tells you, having one pocket, the world was created, the whole olam was created for me. And the other pocket says what? I am but dust and ashes. West African philosophy from the Yoruba and Igbo, the world is a marketplace, but heaven is home. We live with that duality because that's what you do when you're pushed to the edge of your society and your world. You carry around with you the idea that you are greater than what they tell you you're not, and that you are less than what you think. And that's how you make survival happen. We have in our cultures the will to adorn. That was the phrase that Zora Neale Hurston used. And we say in Judaism, chidur mitzvah. So what does that mean? That means when you ask people, what could be our Havdalah spice? Nate's gonna laugh. And 90% say, Florida water. Okay, so y'all are like, what's the joke? So Florida water is a triple double meaning. Florida water is an old fashioned cologne that you can still get, but you can only get it from people who are like root Dr. Hoodoo people. Because when people had a sacred bath, they would put the Florida water in there. When they want to get rid of a duppy or a haint in the house, you'd spray. There's a lot of levels there, right? It's like black holy water. Yes, that cleansing, that kind of stuff. And those layers don't matter to us. Somebody else might say, oh my God, that's Avodah Zarah, it's not Jewish. I would love to show them all the things in Judaism that come from basically either what they think of as Avodah Zarah or just the opposite side of Avodah Zarah, idol worship. No, not at all. The fact that everybody said the same thing means that there definitely is a culture, a presence. Then it's this gastronomic aromatherapy that a black Jewish house should smell like roasted chicken and collard greens. It's the wrapping. I have kente cloth, talitot. I have a Dinkra talitot, an Ethiopian talitot, Sierra Leonean talitot. And why? Because I want people to understand. I'm wrapping myself, and not just in the tradition of the rabbis of Hazal, but in the land of my mothers and fathers. I want them to ask questions when they see me, and that's a really nice talit. It's really pretty. And then I can tell them the story. Because the minute I walk in there with that talit, that becomes every Jew in that place's story. No different than when a kid walks in with a Yankees kippah. It's the same thing. But we're not taught to recognize that similarity. It's the head wrapping that our women have. If you've ever been to West Africa, you've been to Africa, head wrapping is a very important part of the culture. So unlike for our other sisters and friends in Sephardi, Mizrahi, in more religious circles, where it's like, we're talking about head coverings and the tickle, etc. It's a very different cultural reality for us. Because black hair has its own policing and its own history of liberation. It's the brothers who wear the beautiful suits. They're not copying. They're from brothers and cousins all the time. You need to understand something. You're in LA. You had zoot suit riots here where black men who were dandies were basically, and Hispanic men were basically arrested and harassed for style. But we also come from generations, those Borsalinos and fedoras mean something different to us. They mean the grandfathers we saw these beautiful pictures of with the socks and the shoes and the pants that were tailored perfectly. We walk into the shul not as we like to joke, penguins, but we walk in there in the image of our forefathers who, despite all oppression, had the most amazing style. And by the way, at the Met this coming year, the theme is the Black Dandy. And don't I wish that Andre Leon Talley was here to see it in person. But there are levels here. You see what I'm saying? It's not just one thing. It's the kippah that I'm sorry I don't have with me that was done by a Black artist. It has silkscreened Zora Neale Hurston and James Baldwin and Audre Lorde and Jackie Robinson. So when we wear that, we bring our ancestors with us. Or during Sukkot, I do this. I put up pictures of my family. I have pictures of my family going back to people who were born in the 1820s. So I'm using that ritual of welcoming the guests, the ancestors, to welcome all of my ancestors. And of course, the Rebbes are up there, and of course, in the Ben Ish Chai and the Baba Sali. It's layers, and it's something that people ask us to convert, but they don't recognize the ways we fulfill and live our own lives and are ourselves. It's the t-shirts, like the one I got stopped at the airport for by the security. What does that mean? Black, Jewish, queer. It means I'm your worst nightmare. Let me move on. It's the fact that a lot of our communities relish West African garb and wear that very proudly to shul. It's all these levels of representation that I don't want people to miss because they're so busy focused on only one vision of mainstream Jewish life. How is it any different from any other community? When you see a Yemenite bride, you know what that is. When you see a henna with Iranian Jews, you know what that is. When you see people walking around with the spodek and the gartel, you know what that is. So start learning about the dashiki and the bubu. Start learning about our dandy cups, our sapurs. Start learning about all these things because they are part of Jewish life now, and they will be for quite some time to come. We're almost to the food part. Glad you all ate. But when we go through these rituals and talk about the sermonic tradition, go to Cape Persunier Synagogue and others. You will see a synagogue where people practice the same sermonic tradition that keeps you up. None of this, greetings everyone, Shabbat Shalom. Please remember to give. Please remember to give to the JNF. We will be sending Josh Cohen on his first trip, mission trip, and you're about to fall asleep. Versus the other way, with the call and response. There are quite a few places in America where you can feel both the energy of the Black church and the synagogue all in one. And if you haven't noticed, the Black church tradition is 2/3 Hebrew Bible. It's not the same thing as white evangelical. Why? Because it has had to manifest a liberation strategy. And most of those narratives come from the social and class wars of Hebrew text. We've been giving excellent midrashim about the Hebrew Bible for quite some time. Now, how does food fit in all this? My favorite part. So here's the deal. Why is this not a cookbook? Why don't I do that? Because cookbooks are not remunerative. Cookbooks they end up in the bargain bin at Michael's faster than you can think. But books, nonfiction narratives that tell you the story of a people are different. I had the pleasure, Sarah, a couple of weeks ago, before the nonsense during Sukkot. I went to Baltimore and I met one of my interviewees. And I interviewed most people during COVID, so I could meet them face to face. And it was Tikva Womack. But here's the best part. It's not just that. She had her 3 children with her. 4 children with her. And one of her boys, 10 or 11, she opened up the book and read the passage about her to her son. I mean, her husband now has Smika. He's a brother from Baltimore. Dreads, scraggly beard, jean jacket with, a relative, painted on it. And if you didn't notice, look down, seat. All her boys, seat, and Kipot. And Tikva is reading to her son, and I burst into tears because I was like, wow, this is what I wanted. I wanted us to be able to tell our children, we are real, look at us. And he was like, Ema, you're in a book? And he said, yeah, and that's the man who wrote. And he looked in the cover and he said, oh my gosh, why are you here if you're there? And she tells her son, she says, you remember how I make our crab cakes? Well, they're from Baltimore. You can't help it. And she's like, yeah, I take kosher zarimi, and I take salmon, and I take this, and I make these, wonderful crab cakes. And her husband said, our children should only grow up to cook like you and impress their spouses because you're the best cook. And she talked about Old Bay potato. We put Old Bay in everything, us Marylanders. And there's the fact that we have Chava, right, who lives here in this community. And her husband is Jamaican-American, and she is from Louisiana. And they make peace at the table with Jamaican, Moroccan, and Louisiana food. So gumbo is important. Gumbo is the time of Sukkot. But for Naftali, who is Ghanaian, who lives in my area, Sukkot is the time for barbecue. Hanukkah, he's from Ghana. So Hanukkah does not mean latkes. It means fried plantain. Nobody says plantain. There's no such thing as a mountain, so why does it be plantain? But for him, it's his children, who are Ashkenazi mom and himself, 2 Jewish parents, eat bofrot, or puff. So basically it's like the West African equivalent of like a beignet, but it's huge, right? And so all these foods, not just the dorowat, which, somebody makes very well, I hear, but other foods from Ethiopia, from South Africa, from Nigeria, have then become part of the African-American Jewish table, as well as Afro-Caribbean food, Afro-Latino food. And some of those foods, by the way, are there and have become part of Jewish foodways in Brazil, in Curacao, in Trinidad for generations, the same way my teacher and friend Marcy Cohen-Ferris wrote her dissertation about Southern Jewish food, because people didn't realize there were hundreds of thousands of Jewish people who lived and died eating Afro-Creole kosher cooking. That's what Drive Miss Daisy's about, if you paid attention and noticed. Not once during Drive Miss Daisy did they eat one piece of gefilte fish. What do they eat in that movie? She's eating grits and greens and fried chicken and rice. They knew what they were doing. It's one little sliver of the Southern Jewish life that actually preceded Jewish life in other places. There were more Jews in Charleston and Savannah than there were in New York and Philadelphia for generations. Jews in New Orleans, I've seen it. A cemetery not far from New Orleans that was built up by Alsatian Jews. I saw people who were born in France, but died in New Orleans. Graves are covered with rocks. You know who takes care of that grave? Almost all the descendants are gone. It's the Black Catholic and Baptist ladies who take care of that grave. Not because anyone told them to, because it's a part of their local history and their culture. We can talk, you can read the book, you can talk more about it later. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is, Hanak Sadarkim, welcoming the guest, Southern hospitality, African hospitality. I'll leave you with a fun fact before I make a conclusion. I saw this horrible story that says, the further you live away from the Mediterranean, what they really meant was Africa, the less, so if you're in Norway or Sweden or Denmark and you're at someone's home, they don't have to invite you to the table. That's not the culture. In fact, if your kid's over there, they're not gonna go say, hey, wanna eat dinner with us? They're gonna say, okay, you keep doing whatever you're doing. We're gonna go have dinner. Try that mess in a black country. Try that mess in a black Southern household. Try that mess in a black Jewish household. It's not gonna happen. You're gonna leave 4 pounds heavier. Because we believe in the value of community. And there is so much to be lost by not observing and respecting and teaching about our culture. There's so much more to be said about language, as Sarah's written about. There's so much more to be said about our attire, about our music, about Joshua Nelson and Yavilla McCoy. But I guess the most important thing to put in your minds and put in your hearts is that we've been here, we're going to be here, and we need you to amplify our stories and appreciate our culture because we are part of Am Yisrael. Okay, I'm actually gonna come down. What do you think? Go back up.
Okay. A tough act to follow for sure. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. First, I actually want to thank the Kasdan Institute for the study of the role of the Jewish role in American life and for inviting me to participate in this very special and very important event. And especially a thank you to Sarah Benor and Lisa Ansel for all their work coordinating my participation. Finally, it is an honor to be in dialogue with you, Michael, whose work I have found over the years to be not only inspiring and compelling, but also challenging, forcing me to rethink and revise my own preconceptions and beliefs. And for that, I thank you. So when I was thinking about what I was going to say here in response to Michael's wonderful lecture, I wanted to think about how his work really meant so much for my own, right? And to really reflect a little bit on what is so generative about his work for me, and including that he shared with you in this lecture tonight. So in my own research, writing, and teaching, I'm very interested in questions of comparison, relation, and intersection, especially as they pertain to Black and Jewish histories, cultures, and politics. And like Michael, my approach to these questions does not really seek to rehabilitate a master narrative of so-called Black-Jewish relations, whether by romanticizing a natural affinity between Black and Jewish groups or by framing dynamics of hierarchy and exploitation as endemic and eternal. But it also does not appeal to the promise of Black and Jewish intersection by exceptionalizing individual Black Jews. And this tendency, I find, merely replaces the fetish of racial purity with the fetish of racial hybridity. So rather, in my work, I'm interested in excavating all of the plural, idiosyncratic, fertile, tense, and often contradictory ways that Blackness and Jewishness have and continue to interact, intersect, and relate more broadly. And in that spirit, I'm just going to highlight a couple things that I find especially generative in Michael's talk and in his broader work before concluding with some of my own remaining questions. So to start with, I've been for some time in my own work suspicious of the politics of analogy, even as I recognize, of course, their historic mobilizing force, even as I recognize the historic mobilizing force that analogies have played in movements for abolition, civil rights, and decolonization. But my own concern with the politics of analogy is twofold. On the one hand, analogies often flatten Black and Jewish peoples into two discrete and homogeneous groups. In the United States, the dominant Black Jewish analogy frames the African American diaspora, derivative of the Middle Passage and Atlantic slavery, against the primarily Ashkenazi Jewish diaspora that migrated to the United States in the late 19th century in response to a combination of economic decline and mass violence in Eastern Europe. The two diasporas shared narratives of suffering, borrowed from each other's archives of cultural expression, and engaged in sometimes joint struggle and at others tendentious competition and hierarchy. But regardless of how this analogy is narrated, the Black and Jewish diasporas in it always remain discrete. Their integrity as autonomous, indivisible units meandering through history remains unquestioned. Such approaches, I think, ultimately obscure more than they reveal. They displace complex global histories of interaction, interlacing, intersection, and incorporation in favor of a binaristic story that does not trouble the sometimes racial, sometimes ethnic boxes used to govern us. On the other hand, beyond obscuring historical and cultural diversity, analogies can also work as mechanisms of disavowal and innocence. Analogies can sometimes foreclose meaningful solidarity more than they can enable it. Why? When we claim to know or understand the other's experience, we often look for and identify with what resembles ourselves. We assimilate their experience to our own. And in doing so, we might not only prevent ourselves from truly recognizing and listening to difference, we might also overestimate a shared victimhood in the present, overlooking or ignoring the more troublesome ways Black and Jewish peoples have different relationships to whiteness. When, for example, a white Jewish individual or community today claims to understand or identify with the experience of Black vulnerability and victimization in the United States, such claims, in spite of all good intentions, create an ahistorical symmetry, one between experiences and one that elevates this individual's sense of Jewish victimhood in place of a critical confrontation with one's ongoing implication in social, political, or economic structures that reinforce premature Black death. One of the aspects of Twitty's published work then, and his lecture tonight, this evening, that I'm so intrigued and inspired by, is his ability to transcend these analogical ways of thinking, exploding the Black Jewish analogy into hundreds of complex and entangled shards, without elevating a singular hybrid history, culture, or identity in its place. Let me explain. Michael not only deconstructs the binary framing of Blackness and Jewishness as discrete groups and cultures that suddenly encountered one another in the New World melting pot, he also resists replacing such a binary with one hybrid Black Jewish tradition or the autobiography of a single Black Jewish individual. He offers instead a multiplicity of histories and lived experiences of intersecting Blackness and Jewishness, a network of moments, conversations, and rituals where Blackness and Jewishness appear as always already entangled and coextensive. I need to quote from the preface of Kosher Soul so you can get a sense of what I mean. And here Michael describes what he terms the vast net of Blackness and Jewishness. Quote, from the experiences of Black non-Jews who cooked in Jewish households to the foodways of Black frum Jews and those in African and Western communities of some antiquity. This vast net includes Jews who identify as white but Southern, who are heirs to an Afro-Creole food tradition in Southern cuisine, and the cousin traditions held by Black Muslims in America and traditions in Black Jewish congregations and communities that have been separate from the mainstream, end quote. So here we have a thick description of just some of the intersections of Black and Jewish culture and relation, and the relations of Black and Jewish people, that does not shy away from the difficult dimensions of hierarchy, exploitation, and appropriation that shape them, dimensions that make analogies of suffering break down. But most important to my point, however, is that we also get a glimpse of the multiplicity and specificity of Black and Jewish relations that far exceed a master narratives of two discrete diasporas. This is why I'm so interested also in Michael's suggestions this evening in the title of his lecture, that we refine and expand our vocabulary for describing the relations between Black and Jewish cultures, that we experiment with alternative figures of relations such as the mosaic or the braid to represent the more complex and nuanced ways that cultures and peoples fuse, juxtapose, touch, and blend, but without collapsing or conflating them. Michael's description of this vast net offers us a sketch of experiences rather than a set of identities or genealogies. The vast net of Blackness and Jewishness presented does not depend on the reproduction of literal Black Jews, something he discussed in the beginning of his lecture, which is too often predominantly presupposed as sort of the heterosexual product of interracial romance or through conversion. Such individual Black Jews are too often made to literally embody all of the intersections and contradictions of Black and Jewish histories and cultures, which brings me to my next point. Rather than writing a grand, inclusive counter-narrative of Black Jewish history, culture, and belonging, Michael instead excavates for us ordinary moments of intersection, interaction, and ingestion in the everyday lives of people. What I find so special and important about this approach is how it reveals the manifold intersections of Black and Jewish life and culture that are already here, that are happening every day, that are not about romantic grand alliances or conspiracies of domination, but are just about people, all sorts of different, specific, complicated people navigating the multiple flows of migration, forced and unforced, and global circulation of culture that define our modern world. I think what Michael pushes us towards is how comparison and relation and interaction and solidarity are already happening in ordinary ways every day, before and after historians decide to link these particular events together into a redemptive or cautionary narrative. Indeed, such ordinary happenings are too often overshadowed by infamous historical events, whether positive or negative, from which an ideal or paradigmatic Black-Jewish relation emerges as an icon. But there is no Black-Jewish relationship or even Black-Jewish intersection in the singular. There are rather so many Black and Jewish people navigating a multicultural and still violent world, trying to make sense of themselves and their communities, touching and feeling their way in and through Blackness and Jewishness, and often through food. Which now brings me, in my brief conclusion, to some of what remains challenging for me and some of my lingering questions. There is a real promise in material culture, and especially in food. As Michael shows us so beautifully in the book, it is a promise where culture disarticulates from discrete bodies and instead travels between, across, and through them. Food is literally ingested and metabolized. Its smells are inhaled, creating material pathways of relation between people. Food is a link between self and other, a way of coming to know oneself with and through the other. But I wonder as well if there are limits to food in particular as a pathway for reorienting towards a more inclusive, open, and rich landscape of Black and Jewish cultures and expression. I raise this not to make a critique. The importance of food as a pathway to self-knowledge and a way to navigate a culture are well demonstrated. I raise this to simply ask if there are not limits to the role of food as an imaginative pathway toward new forms of solidarity, inter- and intra-communal understanding, or justice. And if there are ways to overcome such obstacles. I'm thinking, of course, of the long and troubled history of the white consumption of Black culture, and I say consumption on purpose, in which fascination and desire are accompanied by extraction and exploitation. But I'm also thinking of how marginalized Jewish peoples and cultures are too often included in mainstream Jewish spaces simply as food to be eaten, music to be heard, art to be looked at. My Syrian Jewish partner often jokes that when white Ashkenazi groups and synagogues want to demonstrate a commitment to diversity, they serve barekas at the Kiddush. Such tendencies reduce diverse Jewish people and cultures to something only consumed and enjoyed, internalizing and reinforcing hierarchies that pit European reason and thought against brown and Black expression and culture. And yet, we of course cannot do without food and music and art and more. And Michael's work is a testament to the ways material culture does allow us to reimagine ourselves and communities in full and open relation with others in and around us. So I wonder how, and I hope we might find ways to engage with and honor the promise of food and of material culture more generally while disrupting these hierarchies. One path, charted and exemplified by Michael, is to make engagement challenging and self-reflective, as it was for me, to ask something of us readers beyond just consumption and enjoyment. And I think there might be an answer in Michael's point that he mentioned tonight, right? That Kosher Soul is not, in fact, a cookbook. And perhaps that might be one way to orient around such an obstacle. So that, for me, is a really critical, compelling, and necessary intervention in our current moment. And I very much look forward to discussing it further with you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Michael and Ben, for those really interesting and thought-provoking speeches and response. We're gonna open it up for questions, but first I do wanna give Michael 1 minute to respond to Ben and maybe add a little something about a Seder plate.
Sure. I need you to beat my Luther. Like, wow. All of that, especially that, and there's a reason why I do call and response in that one point about the barakas. Sephardic and Mizrahi identity. And by the way, my home synagogue in Maryland is Moroccan, Tunisian, Persian, Syrian, etc. And you when you're there, you know the difference between Sfadiut and Yiddishkeit. It's very real. You have to live in it. You can't just kind of like dip your toes in it. It's a very different sort of like reality when it comes to Jewishness. So many things flooded my head as you were talking. And yeah, it's hard to tell people that, our history is the Inquisition. Our history is enslavement and the slave trade. Our history is also abolitionism. Our history is also limited liberation engagement. What do I mean by that? I mean Susan B. Anthony, look it up. And I mean these ideas that some of these figures that we put all of this sort of like heft and admiration. These are just people like us. Even Frederick Douglass had a Jewish girlfriend. Look it up. Joel Parker Rhodes, Douglas's women. It gets deep. We ain't got time for that tonight. So the tea is hot, but it's waiting for you at the back of the room. It's also just like knowing that when you see another black Jewish brother, you go, "What's up, Ahi?" White Jewish people don't go, "Hey, Ahi." That's an us thing, Or, the Seder plate that Sarah, thank you, prompted me about very quickly. So one of the traditions that I partially, don't give me all the credit for it, partially helped innovate is African-American Seder plate, which came from two things. I was at a Seder a long time ago with Julius Lester. And they would make kind of like touched on it, but they didn't really make a full plate. So I decided to make a plate, and it went, semi-viral among Jewish circles. And I've actually asked indigenous Americans who are Jewish and Asian Americans who are Jewish, Latino Americans Jewish, to all do their own version of a Seder plate. Why? Because it's very easy to insert. So in my particular Seder plate, there's collard greens from Maror, and there's the hot pepper is the hazeret, the horseradish. And that actually comes from a black Jewish community that's not mainstream. And I put okra on there for our African roots and traditions. The egg has a very parallel meaning in Akan religion, which is predominantly monotheistic in Judaism. And of course, like the haroset becomes pecans and molasses in my version. But if you're from Uganda, it's bananas and peanuts and other things. In other words, you can take that one item and use it to tell multiple stories. And they're not always congruent. And that's the point. They don't have to be. And then, of course, our tables have, challah covers from Ghana and the marginalized Jewish communities have been able to make their presence known and also sustain themselves by making unique Judaica, right? And we don't want that Judaica to become fetishized, become exoticized, but we also want to make sure people understand there are other forms of Jewish expression. And before I shut up, I'll challenge you. Go watch a video of the Jewish community in Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire. You will want to go to their services. Because, they get down. And it feels like, having been to West Africa, 8 times, and knowing that tradition and also how fluid it is, and also knowing Jewish tradition. There's a lot to be said for the fact that a Lubavitcher and a Breslover Hussid, if they got the rhythm right, would feel very at home among the Jews of Ivory Coast. But that complexity is something we have to delve into. Thank you for the opportunity to do that.
Thank you. So we're going to open it up for questions. We're going to take 3 at a time, and then we'll address those and then take some more.
So there's being one of the generation of young black Jews that were born of an interfaith, interracial couple, and also being one of the first generation of kids raised by and born to queer parents. There are certain things that I've seen in terms of trends within both the Jewish and the queer community. And one of the things that I think is going to be very interesting, and I'd love to hear both of your opinions on. Thank you. One of the things that I think is very interesting right now, and I'd love to hear both your opinions on, is the shift in how many young Jews of color there are because of queer couples adopting. In my generation, most of the queer couples were either adopting children that were the same color as them or having in vitro fertilization. Now, when I go to my home synagogue, Beit Chaim Chadashim, there is not an in vitro child in the house, and every single adoptee is a completely different complexion than their parents. But this is something that has whole new connotations in terms of identity when someone has been adopted into a faith that is opposite their own and into a household that defies the standards and norms of the society.
I'm so glad you're here.
Okay, wait, let's take 2 more questions and then we'll do
Yeah.
them in groups. Okay.
We had to hold that in our brains for like 5 minutes? Okay, do what you gotta do.
Yes, go ahead.
My question, obviously there's a problem with anti-Semitism nowadays around at least the country. I'd like to hear each of you express ideas or opinions on how we might reduce anti-Semitism. I know we're not going to ever get rid of it completely, but we can try to reduce it. So maybe the 3 of you can talk about some ideas for reducing it.
And one in the back.
I was really moved, Ben, when you shared your partner's observation that the way that we include other cultures is through their food, and how tokenizing that can be. And my question for you, both of you, is what role are you envisioning food playing in the broader mosaic of inclusion of Jews whose backgrounds are atypical, minorities who are outside of Ashkenormativity in any way? And this question has been one I've been wrestling with for a while because someone once asked me what it means to teach about Sigd at a Reform religious school and what the role is of entirely white religious school staff to share that information. And so I would love if your answer to my question about food as a tool of building bridges could include thinking about how do we bring in stories of other people when we don't have people from those communities, and how do we make our communities safe to invite those people in without tokenizing them?
Okay, I'll do this real quick. Boom, boom, boom. All right, to Enoch's question. When I went to Bechol Lashon for the first time, which deals with Jews of color and multicultural families, and I went to the retreat in Marin County, and I was asked to talk about my experience and asked to engage with the young people. And I felt so weird because it was the first time in my life I had the majority of Jewish children look like me, and second, that the majority of the parents had my same orientation. Okay? Two different, and of course, a lot of the parents were not. I think only half the family was there one partner or spouse that was of color. And so I'm supposed to talk to these kids about my East Coast and Southern experience when they're very Bay Area. And I was like, wow, we don't live, it was my first ding, 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 we do not live the same life. And so it wasn't easy for me to have that conversation because my experiences were rather harrowing compared to theirs, where it's like, oh, a Jew can be this, that's not the issue. The issue is, how do we, as a community, process all of that and make room for that? And the fact that in most mainstream treatments, what was that ridiculous movie? You're not invited to my bar mitzvah, whatever. And I was like, what an opportunity lost. There were some things that were pretty good, but there were other things that were just like, y'all missed the mark yet again. Because guess what? Synagogues have lesbians now, and trans people, and gay couples, and adopted kids who don't look like other people. And they have kids who are biracial, they have kids who are both Jewish but not white, and so on and so forth. And if you were going to create this fictional, Jewish community with Adam Sandler or whatever, you could have gone, if it's imagination, we can go a little bit further. Because people need to see queer Jews. Or the fact that, bounce one more part to that answer, is that now we have not just one or two or three, but multiple black Jews who are queer in rabbinical school who have become rabbis. So yeah, we've been done that. Anti-Semitism. You know what? I'm still angry about the Kanye thing. But what I'm angriest about is that we Jews of color, they didn't care about us, what we had to say. It was about hurt Ashkenazi white people's feelings and mad, angry black people who don't understand Jews. And I'm like, this conversation is so daggone binary, it's frustrating. And when I tried to jump into the conversation and do my work, I didn't get amplified and supported by the community. This post-kosher soul. You know what I got? You know what we're tired of? We're tired of advocacy against anti-Semitism, where all the Jews are white and all the Jews are black and Christian. And never shall they meet. And that's why we have more anti-Semitism, because people don't know we exist. They don't know they're hurting us. They don't know that our children are being hurt. They don't understand what it's like to be in community with people who are on social media. Some of you social media is whatever. To black Americans, social media is extremely important. It is a free gateway to the world that helps amplify people who have knowledge, who in traditional systems might not be amplified, and have people have voices. And when we get online and various platforms and see anti-Semitism, I'm gonna tell you, there is a very real anti-Semitism that applies to anybody, regardless of what their phenotype is. When I was here last year, that's all we could talk about, and how we felt and how we saw it, and how people denied we even existed or called us. You know what's funny? It's funny when you and me and him are all Jews, right? But yet you're the imposter because you're white, and I'm the imposter because I'm not him. And we're all, it was like, what? People don't have basic literacy about Judaism or Jewish people, let alone Jewish diversity. They have no literacy about it. Kids don't study this. We have not made multiculturalism a true priority, even though that is our lifeblood as a country. Those of you who've heard me speak before, you've heard me say, if you don't know how multicultural you are, you have forfeited your Americanness. Good luck with that. So I want it to be less, but I also want to teach Jewish kids. I'm not gonna overtalk it, but it's something to be a black teacher in a very wealthy area, Montgomery County, Maryland, teaching kids about how to handle prejudice. Because they heard the word anti-Semitism, but they never learned from the adults how to deal with it. And here you have somebody who is being called the F word, the N word, the K word, or whatever. And here I am giving them a master class on what they're going to face in the world. My kids didn't go off to college not knowing how to handle collegiate anti-Semitism. My kids were amped and prepared. because I taught them the same way a black parent teaches black children how to handle that nonsense. I taught them how a queer elder teaches a queer younger how to handle that nonsense. I didn't dance around it, talk around it. I said, no, this is what you're going to face. This is what you got to do to protect yourself. Third question. Let me lay it out so I can bounce it back. We have to make investments in bringing in diverse Jewish voices into schools and into synagogues, okay? That's number one. Pay them people for their pain and their story and their struggle. Second of all, you have to remind people, it's not the food. You remember during the last, you know what, and Stephen Miller went into a Mexican restaurant eating their food after he put their kids in cages? What a shanda. May he pay for that in Gehenna. But the bottom line is this. Eating people's food and consuming their stuff and just kind of waltzing away and doing their TikTok dance but still voting. Nah. What we have to do is work through the recipes, right? And talk to them. Say, you know where this comes from? Okay, let me give you a quick good example so I can bounce off to that. There's a really great creator online. She's Korean American, and she makes her parents eat food from all over the world. And they're so cute because they're really receptive. But you know what she does? She explains to them, this is where this comes from. And their parents are there listening and they're absorbing. And I love the father, because the father, when he likes it, he says, busted. Which is cool, right? And they're absorbing this. And she's really showing them how beautiful the multicultural fabric is. And we have to remind people, the minute you talked about Sikh, which is a Jewish Ethiopian holiday, which is now a national holiday in Israel, right? We have to understand this is part of Judaism. It's as much a part of Judaism as rituals and community celebrations from all over the Jewish world. And we have to teach Jewish diversity. I taught my kids, in the culture cell I talk about showing the students a people apart. Remember that one? Leonard Nimoy and Sarah Jessica Parker. And I remember how angry administrators would get. Why are you showing them this documentary about Hasidic Jews? They need to learn Hebrew. Okay, but you take them in 10th grade, you take them up to New York from Maryland, and you take them to Chabad Lubavitch, and they don't know how to relate to these people. Who are their people? Who are their cousins? So you mean to tell me among y'all white Jewish folk, Ashkenazi folks, you don't know how to relate to each other? And then you wonder why we're not Am Echad. You can't take the kid up to see the ultra-Orthodox world out of nowhere and give them no education. In the same way, we have ultra-Orthodox kids who need to understand Reformed Jews are not heathens and devils. Greatest thing of my life was being in a Jewish philanthropy camp, and I had 2 girls who were from, and I had 2 girls who were very not from, and someone said something really offensive about how the frum women dress, and the frum girls were very upset, and the other 2 girls were like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? And I said, can I take them out of the group for a second? And I had them sit together, one girl, the girl with the short shorts and the girl with the long jean dresses, and explain to each other, why do you dress that way? What's your family life like? And you're like, you're the first Reformed girls I ever met. Oh, you're the first Orthodox girls I ever met. And they're the same age and they're Jewish. That should be a commonplace experience in Jewish America, that we should know each other. What you got, bro?
I don't have so much to add to that. I mean, but I think I would say, specifically with this last point, along the same lines, it's not about the food, right? And too often it is just about the food, or it is just the music, right? In the sense that even how it is incorporated into a space, let's say a synagogue space, is marginal, right? It's on the table on the side, or it's coming out of the speakers, right? But of a real, living, three-dimensional, complicated person, right, is not present. And of course, there are all kinds of explicit and implicit reasons why such a person is not present, right? And so I think that what you just pointed to, even when you just in the beginning of your answer there, when you said it's not about the food, right, really is, I think, crucial to how we think about these things. But the other thing with, that I will say is that it also just isn't just food, meaning to say that, all of these cultures, whether it's Ethiopian Jewish, Syrian Jewish, and whatnot, right, it isn't just exotic food and exotic music, right? They were intellectuals, they were writers, right? They were theologians, all of these things. A student of mine recently said that they were learning Yiddish. And I said, why? And they said, well, because someone told me it was the language of the Jewish left, And I said, you should open a Marxist journal from Iraq and see how many Jews were writing in it, But it's true. We have this idea that there's just these kinds of, Jewish thought and whether it's religious thought or political thought or what have you, right, is from a certain place, and that has everything to do with that place being Europe, right? And the rest is expression. So it's also bringing in those other things along with the kind of mosaic of culture, the food, the music, and what have you, right? And not just leaving it there.
Thank you. 3 more questions. Yes.
A lot of this is very fascinating. It's given me too many things to think about. But one of the things you mentioned is the difference between eating, just consuming, say, Mexican food or Ethiopian food or whatever, and absorbing or learning about the culture which produced the ingredients for that food, as well as the prepared food. And how important is that to impart to, whether it's our children or to ourselves, to bridge all of these divides that you're trying to address?
So my question is a bit of an add-on to the question about anti-Semitism. And you kind of spoke to it before, but I'm curious if you could shed a little bit more light on the convergence of anti-Semitism for Jews of color, for Black Jews in particular, that are also LGBTQ post-October 7th.
Not quite sure how to phrase this, but I appreciate the way both of you have an understanding of the complexity and the specificity of history. And I'm curious about the notion that I think that you were speaking to a bit about Black-Jewish relations, the Black-Jewish alliance, these kinds of bumper sticker terms that get used, right? How do we approach that history with the intellectual honesty of knowing that it's complex, it's not romanticized, it's not essentialized, and find a way of drawing on the degree to which there are shared values, the degree to which there has been a shared history of pushing back against persecution in solidarity or not? How do you rehabilitate what there is that can be used to fuel a politics of solidarity and progressive movement without falling into the traps of romanticizing and essentializing the past in a dishonest way?
Thank you. We'll get the answers to those, and then we'll wrap it up.
This question about the food and access. You know something, when I was on High on the Hog on Netflix, the host asked me to define soul food. And I think there's this tendency that people give us global Africans, well, they can dance, they can make music. But when the former editor of Rolling Stone says, well, there's no Black philosophers in the music, nonsense. The very existence of your title, the very existence of, sorry, but the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the Kinks, and all those British groups, they understood that something was different, a different philosophy, a different way of looking at life was present in Black American music. They understood there was something going on there. And no, you didn't need cultural historians like myself or one of my great teachers, Robert Ferris Thompson, who's no longer with us, to understand that mambo, salsa, hip-hop, house, go-go, blues, rap, they're all Afro-Atlantic philosophies. Every single one of them has an aesthetic, a kind of thought, and if it was written down on paper in big academic words, there would not be enough ink in the ocean and trees for pens to really understand what that means. You know, y'all grew up with Desi Arnaz singing about Babalu. Who is Babalu? And Orisha. The song is literally a Cuban cafe song that comes from a folk song, that comes from a rich Santeria ritual song, meaning I am so struck with love I am cursed, and I'm ill, right? I got my mojo working. What's mojo? Muyo from Congo, my people, the soul, the neshama. And to me, it's effortless when you look at that and look at Hasidus, and you look at all these other things. It's the same thing, it's different language. An African says Orisha or Odun, the Jew says Sefirot. And if you look at the metaphysics behind it, and the art and the spirit and the letter all combined, there is a point where human beings in their grand philosophies are very similar more than they're different. And so to enact the culture, it's not just about singing the song, it's what does the song mean? What is the food? Why do we have this particular food? And then, for example, Ben, there's this beautiful cookbook called something about honey, and it's about this. It's literally recipes.
Olive trees and honey?
Well, it's similar, but it's literally every recipe is taken from the Inquisition records. And it has a text. That's what inspired me, is the text saying, so-and-so, a Jew of Saragossa, was on trial, and the maid came and reported them and said, there was no pork in this dish. So what were they eating? How does it fit into the context of those trials? And there were literally thousands. And then you look at that and go, wait a minute, this is more than just, okay, so we made this food. This is, now you are, like we say in Pesach, now we are slaves, right? Now you are present in the memory of your people. When I taught Hebrew school, I made challah with the bagel family recipe from Joe Nathan, who was a friend of mine. And that recipe was from people who were in the Shoah. So yeah, I can teach you about the Shoah, or I can be like, these are real human beings. Every single person was a real person in a real life, and they were just like you. Not just this grand number and this, scary, weird thing. You don't take your kids to the Holocaust Museum without actually giving them an idea of what they're going to experience when they get there. Remind them, this is every single human life. I would walk in the door and I'd be like, okay, so you see how the Nuremberg laws were like Jim Crow? Okay, everybody needs to be able to find on the map where their ancestors came from. Well, that's a black thing. What county in the South are you from? Oh, you did your DNA? Where's Nigeria? Where's our homeland? They didn't do that before, but that was my spirit. Every kid would walk in and doing that. We have to give context and nuance to every single person. Adult education, we do that beautifully, more than any other community. In our Hebrew schools, in our day schools, in our synagogue programs, and beyond. And like Ben said, we have to remind people, philosophy and higher thought is not just Western. And the one thing about being Jewish is those communities communicated ideas with each other in ways that Christian Europe did not. It was it's amazing. Question about intersectional anti-Semitism. It's really tough that in a lot of queer circles, you can't even have a kippah on. It's not even just about the question of Israel-Palestine, it's a question of just being Jewish. But this is an old thing, we know that, Nate, because when you're blamed for religion and patriarchy, certain parts of the queer community have always tolerated the lovely Jewish grandma, the bubby, but they haven't really tolerated other parts of Judaism and Jewish existence, Jewish culture. And it's really problematic to see. I've been out since I was 16 years old. I'm 47 now. It's 30-some years. to not have pride be home anymore because people want to get in your face about something they don't know about. The other level is how do black Jewish people experience anti-Semitism? We experience through, for me, it was. I'll just give you a point-blank example. It's within 24 hours of someone saying to me, "Why haven't you burned the Israeli flag yet?" First of all, I don't want to waste money on a flag just to burn them. Call me old-fashioned. The other part was black Jewish, very zealous kind of person kind of blacklisted me on social media and said, well, he's not a real Jew. Now, notice what I said, black Jewish and me. I didn't say somebody who obviously could say something very racist or anti-black towards me. These things layer up for us. It's very difficult. I'm so glad that I was here with this community for a huge part of that experience because I wasn't alone. All of us were putting out fires and doing that kind of work. And, people would say nasty things online. Like, I would kind of push back and say, at least in my community, we have a rubric for having deep and hard conversations about racism, whatever. And then people were just like, see how they are with their Talmud, and they're like, what? This went from Israel, Palestine to straight up year 1200. What's going on here? Do y'all even know what you're talking about? Have you ever met a Jewish person of color or a black Jew in your life that you could have and some of us, of course, we don't all agree on everything. But at least we have these sensitivities. And we're not being, like I said, we're not being heard. And that's the worst part. We have Rabbi Sandra Lawson, y'all. We have so many people. We have Eric Green here. We have so many people who do really good work. And they should be up on that stage, not, what's that guy with Noah Tishby wrote the book with? The basketball player, right? I'm like, we're so tired. Yes, we're tired of these folks being highlighted while those of us in the community have no voice because we can tell you we get it from every side. We get it going back home. We get it from, sorry to say this, we get it from white identified Jews who think they know better than us. Can you imagine the number of times I've been, Michael, I'm concerned because, as a black person, I think you think I should what? Twist my pants. You think I should what? You gonna explain to me? Oh, baby, I get it. See, I'm right here watching everybody suffer and I hate it. Okay? But that conversation, Nate, is something we should have conversations about in every Jewish communal environment and get it out. Because we got to change it. What was the last one?
Well, actually, we are unfortunately out of time.
We're out of time?
Yes, so
no!
we'll have to continue offline.
Can we, like 2 minutes,
Okay,
we're going to handle the last one. I'll give it all to Ben, please.
I'll just really quickly address the last point there. I mean, the question around how do we treat these histories, learn from them, mobilize them, right, with honesty. It starts with honesty, The number of Jews involved in the civil rights movement was marginal. The number of Jews involved in the anti-apartheid movement was marginal. Now they're celebrated. But I think it really begins with honesty, and that's not just a matter of correcting the record, but it's because that's how we actually learn and change. Well, why weren't there overwhelming numbers of Jews involved, and how might we change that? If we just look celebrating the people we like, then we just say, oh yeah, that's nice. I don't really have anything to learn then, right? So it starts with an honest look at that history, I would say.
Well, thank you to both of you for enriching our scholarship, our communities, and our evening. And I think Lisa has some parting words.
Yes, thank you. On behalf of the USC Kasdan Institute, the USC Shoah Foundation, and Hebrew Union College, I wish to thank Michael Twitty and Ben Ratzkoff again for sharing their keen insights and perspectives on the fascinating fusion of Black Jewish history, identity, and material culture. I would also like to thank all of you, our audience, for coming out tonight, and I hope to see you at our next Kasdan event. Good night, and thank you.
Okay.